Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, Ingenious Thinkers, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of ingenuity. My name is Ken Tencer, curator of Say Hi to the Future, helping leaders think differently in the face of uncertainty and ambiguity. Better thinking, better outcomes. With me today is Murendeni Mafumo, founder of Kusini Water, a social enterprise focused on bringing clean water to communities in need around South Africa. Murendeni Mafumo, welcome to Say Hi to the Future.
Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone. Thank you so much.
Just for our listeners or viewers, you are in South Africa. Where exactly are you today? Where are you coming from?
Yeah, so right now I am in Johannesburg. Originally I'm from up north. I live in Johannesburg at the moment, but originally I am from Limpopo, just by the border with Zimbabwe.
Very nice. So we'll talk more about your company, Kusini Water, in a few minutes. But overall, you're about bringing clean water to communities in need around South Africa. Let's go back a bit because as a child, you talked to your always asking questions, always being inquisitive, and moving you into becoming a scientist and then a scientist focused on water technology. So go back to your childhood just for a minute or two. Like, is this just something that came to you? You always wanted to do or know something more?
So I grew up in a very, very rural area. However, my mom made a mistake of buying me a set of books called Young Scientist. So at the time, it was a time of encyclopedias. So since Young Scientist was basically the encyclopedic version for young scientists, I guess. So it was a set of 20 books that focused on 20 different scientific principles. So at the time, I must have been, I don't know, I want to say nine-ish, 10-ish, somewhere there. And these things were, yeah, it was like the first book was all about earth. Second book was all about water, all about electricity, all about chemistry, and it had science experiments in it. So it was like the coolest thing ever. So in the area that I come from, science was not a big thing. It was like the biggest thing was lawyer. So if you look at like some of the more famous South Africans growing up, they were lawyers. So like Nelson Mandela or Tambo, the guys that we're seeing, a lot of the black guys were lawyers. So science was not a big thing, but it was so fascinating for me. So I started experimenting a lot with things as simple as buoyancy, things as simple as density, but also as crazy as explosives from charcoal. So that's really where that came from. And then growing up, we started getting a TV. I mean, for the first seven years of my life, we didn't have a TV at home. Got a TV when I was 7, and that was fascinating. So I was always behind there. So they banned me from touching the TV because I just I would break it a lot. So yeah, my childhood was a lot about that. I think up till about a few years ago, the roof had a bend because I decided to start an experiment of creating light, diffusing light from a poster using candles. But what I didn't think of at the time was that paper does get burnt. So when the paper started burning, it started burning the roof because I thought I could diffuse light with the paper. So yeah, that was my childhood.
I bet your mother never thought that she needed to get you a fire extinguisher with the books. That's,
Never.
that's amazing, though. That inquisitiveness, and it continued. I mean, this is what you went to university for quite some time for science. So
Yeah.
you pursued it.
Yeah. So immediately in primary school, I knew I wanted to be something in the sciences world. So I knew that I want to be in the science world. Where I come from, in the area, it's called Venda. There used to be back in the day because we used to be a homeland. So we used to be almost like an independent country within South Africa. So there were what 4 or 5 different homelands. So the advantage of being in a homeland, as much as it was almost like this racial segregation that forced people to live together, but the biggest advantage was that there was this things called schools of specializations, which is not a big thing now. So if you wanted to be like an engineer, an artisan, you could go to a school like that. So I was like I'm going to a technical school. So it's called Tando Technical High School. I was not accepted into the school. So and you won't believe why I was not accepted. So we had to write a test before. There was no electricity at home at that night. So I couldn't write the test. So I was not accepted into the school. So I camped outside the principal's office for a week to be accepted into the technical school. So I always knew that I'm going to be in some ways or shape or form in the technical space. So even in university, I knew that I wanted to be in the science, technical space. Chemistry sounded right, sounded like the perfect scientific thing to do. So I chose chemistry to do undergrad.
That's another incredible story. Thanks for sharing that. And I just have to point out, and this is a quote from a wonderful professor who's passed now, but he said, there are no brick walls, there are only sledgehammers, and it's up to you to pick them up. And I listen to you and I think, wow, I mean, you were going to do this no matter what happened in your life.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
One of the fascinating things now getting to water and water technology, I mean, again, your purpose to bring clean water to communities in need around South Africa. And the problem, and I'm obviously borrowing this from your information, 6 million people in South Africa lack access to safe, clean water. 1 out of 3 schools don't have access to clean water, raising a high risk of a lack of sanitation. 1 out of every 5 children die to water-related diseases monthly. It's almost not believable in this day and age that something so horrific can be going on.
Yeah.
Just talk to us about the problem and how that engaged you and what you wanted to do.
Yeah. So for me, it was quite an interesting sort of a full circle journey for me because I grew up in a village. And growing up, water has always been a topic of conversation. So it's always who's going to collect water? Do we have water in the tank? So we used to have these drums that every single household, even to this day, has a drum. Because we're just so used to not having water growing up. So when I went to university, I studied chemistry. My first ever scientific experiment that was published was in wastewater. So when I started working in industry, especially because I worked in Cape Town, which is almost the polar opposite of where I come from, it's the most citiest of city. It's such a city to the last degree. So coming back home, having worked in Cape Town, having experienced this sort of brutal civilization compared to where I come from was a big eye opener. I remember I was working at the time as a water scientist. I used to work in the municipality as a water scientist. So I was home and I was sitting down. It was during December holiday, so which is the summer holiday for us. So normally we go home, we sit under a tree. Normally it's a mango tree. So this one time I was just sitting outside and I watched this boy walking up. He was pushing a wheelbarrow with a jerry can inside of that wheelbarrow. As I'm watching him walk up, it dawned on me that actually even I am now disconnected from the problem that has affected even me my whole life by the fact that I've moved to the city. So you can imagine if people that, especially someone like me that grew up in the villages but live in the city, not realizing the scale of the problem, even though I work for a municipality. So imagine what it's like for far removed people. And the scale of the problem, even in the last 2022 water and sanitation report, is even larger than that because the 6 million people is an official statistic, but the official statistics is based out of so safely managed water. So there are 5 million extra people that don't have water in their homes. So meaning that the 5 million have been counted because there's a water tap nearby them. So it could be a kilometer from their house, it could be 500 meters from their house. So the scale of the problem is so big. So it happened in me, something was, wow, there's such a big problem where I come from. There's such a big problem that has been experienced by people that look exactly like me. And I work for a big city trying to solve this problem. So I realized then that maybe there's an opportunity for someone who sort of maybe has lived this problem to try and fix it in one way or another.
So you started, as you said, working with the city, and that's where you truly understood the problem. Then in between that, though, you had a stint, I think, working with schools.
Yeah.
So was this something that you put together the water issue that you worked on with the school and the school children and the impact on society? Was that part of the aha moment for you?
Yeah, so the biggest, so even now, recently, last year in 2023, we had a cholera outbreak. And I mean, it's purely a waterborne disease, especially in our context. And the reason why that happened was because not just of aging infrastructure, not just, this boom in urban population growth in Africa and in Southern Africa, but the biggest impact of that has always been in schools, because that's where the biggest congregant of young people, the most vulnerable people are. So when we started the project, we were thinking we're going to work with villages. We were thinking we're going to work with villages, with homes, but actually realized that the biggest risk is inside classrooms, is inside schools, it's inside parameters where children aged 7 to 13, the most vulnerable kids, as well as the elderly, are every day being exposed to unsafe water. So we started working with schools. We started working with the Department of Education to try and solve this problem from the school. There are lots of advantages of us working in a school. One of those being, generally speaking, schools are safer than other places. There would be a fence, there would be people all around, there would be some sort of a security guard. So we started working in the schools to ensure that at least in a village, at least in a township, at least in a rural area, the schools should have drinking water. Community can come and get drinking water from the schools as well. So when we build decentralized systems, which is sort of how we think about the future of water, schools form an important role in that.
That's incredible, actually. And sorry, that's just probably my Western ignorance to know that the role of schools in providing drinking water through what might be a single tap to a village. And now I look at Kusini and what you've done to help address this. Tell us about just the bridge between seeing a single tap, which you might, as you're saying, access to water can be walking half a kilometer, half a mile, whatever, a mile to a single tap at a school. I mean, that is not exactly still the easiest access. So
yes.
What you've done, you've brought it to the home, to the individual. Like, tell us a little bit about Kusini now and how that came about.
Yeah. So so our whole idea around what we're trying to build is, so access to water, especially in the context of the African continent, should be decentralized. Centralized systems have worked a lot for much smaller population, much more advanced communities or societies. But in the African continent, we've got 1 trillion rands, if I'm not mistaken, our local currency, of an infrastructure deficit, an amount of money that is needed in order to bring water to people. And the reason why that is such a big amount is because all of the centralized systems heavily rely on the highlands. So we've got a few big water bodies in the country and in the Southern African region. So what our entire thesis is that the future of water will be a lot more decentralized. So there would be a lot more collecting water from as local as possible. And the future of water will also involve a lot of safely managed systems. So by safely managed systems, we are including things like IoT sensors, for example. We're including a little bit of machine learning. We're including a little bit of data collection, a little bit of data collection to understand consumption rates, maintenance schedule, preventative maintenance, and all these things. So what we then did was that we started by putting up decentralized systems in school. Then we go and put up decentralized systems in communal land, land that is primarily owned by the community. From those two bodies of water, we're then able to connect that water to people's homes. We're then able to connect that water to as close as possible to where people can either not walk more than, our current target is not walk more than 8 minutes, or they must have it from their homes. So we have 4 distinct ways that we manage that. So we've got you walk to go get the water, but we want to cut that distance to as short as possible. Secondly is the water comes to you. So we've got some ways that we bring the water to you, be it in a truck, be it in a tank, whatever the case is. But also importantly, the water is in your home. So you're drinking water in your glass. And that's the target. So we want all of 100% of all our consumers or all of the beneficiaries in our water systems to be drinking it in a glass. That's the ultimate vision, that by 2027, we will be drinking Kusini water in a glass. And the way to do that is to safely manage water, manage groundwater, manage seawater, understand the rain, the amount of rain that's falling, understanding the amount of replenishment that you're going to be having, collecting as much data as you possibly can to do that, and then applying machine learning to it to make that as efficient as possible.
So the output, though, and we'll obviously show it when we run the video. And I'm not a scientist, but I look at it and it almost looks remarkably simple. Nanotechnology, academia in nutshells, but simplicity is usually just the front for incredibly complex problem solving. Yeah. So tell us about, it doesn't look much different than an oil filter from a car.
Yeah. And you see the key with what you're trying to do is, yes, definitely simplicity. Make it affordable. Make it as affordable to put up as much as possible, because we have to front the big investment to a lot of our communities. And number two, make it easy to operate. 50% of all aid-based water projects fail within the first 2 to 3 years. Biggest reason why that's the case, they're just too complex. They're complex to operate. They cost a lot of money to operate. They use up a lot of chemicals and a lot of electricity. Our systems, gravity fed, or in some cases they use renewable energy. Solar would have like a big solar panel on top, which I can share with you some of those images. So therefore, allowing the system to run at as little energy as possible, allowing the system to not need any chemicals, and simplifying it so that the community itself can run it. Ideally, we've got community members that are running our systems. We've got about 200 people that are trained to run the systems. We call them water champions. And in every single community that we operate in, they champion the operations of our systems. So they maintain, they monitor, and then ensure that this thing continues to run for their own community.
So let me understand now, is this at the home level yet, or is it still the community water point, I'm not sure what to call it exactly.
Yeah, so the system is sort of a 3-stage based system. So it collects water in one locale. It produces it in that decentralized but centralized location. So in every village, there will be one system that is running, or two in some cases. It's not in people's homes. So the system collects water from a source in communal places. That water gets sent into what we call a mini grid. That's similar to a normal water grid that runs in a city, like any other city, in Canada, in the US. The difference is that the water source itself is coming from that location. So it could be groundwater. So we would have groundwater, a fence. I'll show you some pictures. There'll be a fence around it. There'll be a treatment system. There'll be tanks there. That water then gets piped through a network of mini grid. So some pipes would run on the ground into as close as possible to people's homes, and in some cases inside their homes.
One of the things that I read, again, part of the system, the treatment system, you're using macadamia nut shells. What role do they play, and how is the overall filtration done?
Yeah, so the overall filtration takes place over a typical 4-stage treatment, similar to most similar to most physical removal of physical treatment of water. So it goes through primary treatment, which is your sediment removal. After your sediment removal, you go through the macadamia nut shells. This is a carbon source. So we use the shells, the waste shells, to convert them into activated carbon, which is very, very good for removal of organics, soluble organics. That's good for taste and smell of water. So the macadamia nut shells are used primarily as a carbon source. Then it comes into the nanofibers. The nanofibers are synthesized here locally. So we've got a local synthetic company that makes the nanofibers from a university research. So it's primary treatment, which is sediment removal, secondary treatment, which is more around activated carbon, nanofibers, and then sterilization before distribution. Sterilization typically is UV, like any typical off-the-shelf UV, or in some cases ozonation. So it's Mechanical four-step. The only difference is that we've got our own proprietary carbon as well as the nanofibers as well, which reduces the biggest advantage is the reduction of cost of electricity. So unlike the reverse osmosis and other membranes, they require a lot of electricity. Ours doesn't.
And what's the impact been? I mean, what are you seeing now in villages or communities that you're working with?
Yeah, so it's quite fascinating. We were talking about schools earlier. One of the biggest things, the South African government has a policy on school feeding programs. So school feeding programs are in every rural or government school, kids need to eat for free in the school. But it's a challenge for kids to eat and to get food when there's no water, because a lot of the food you have to grow it as well. So the biggest impact that we've got is that when we started in all of our schools, we had 50 schools that we did in the first, I think, 4 years of our operations. All 50 schools have water, but then secondly, they can grow their own food. That food is used to feed the kids. So the one impact is, yes, the school has access to clean water. So when there's a cholera outbreak like we had last year, none of our schools have to close. So biggest impact is access to clean water. Secondly, we never have to stop learning in school because there's no water. South African law says that if there's no access, if there's no water for a day, you have to close the school. Kids can't learn in an environment where there's no water. So in our all of our schools, the school will have access to clean water for drinking. The school will have water that they use to grow food. The school will have good sanitation, and that means that they never have to close down their doors. And now we're seeing villages now doing stuff around the water. So the pictures that I'm going to show you, you will see there's like little veggies sprouting around it. So the community is planting because there's water that's around the village. We just recently put as a new village system online. We put that system, let's say, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. By 3:23, the taps were already running and people were already standing collecting the water. So we see that villages with the water, which is important. But also they start to grow food around as well. They start to do other things around the water as well. So we've got about 220,000 people right now that we impact on a daily basis. So there's 220,000 people that in one way or another get water from us. So it could be in a school, it could be in their home, it could be in a communal tap, a hospital, a clinic, a healthcare facility. And we believe that with water, we can stimulate economies. With water, we can stimulate learning. With water, kids don't have to walk for miles to go get get water, and allowing them to stay in school for a little bit longer. So those 220,000 people form a part of that.
Murendeni Mafumo, Kusini Water, it's just fascinating to listen to you. It's unbelievable what you're doing. And I do want to ask you one thing, and I want to start with one comment. I am so glad that your mother bought you those 4 books.
Yeah.
What has come out of it is truly remarkable. And obviously, it's not the books as much as the person, but putting the two together has created something incredible. So how scalable is this? How can you impact millions or move water from the middle of a village to homes in time?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we learned recently was that people, if we sort of build it with the idea of sort of this human-centered design, human-centered building, that's going to be our scale. So in all of the communities where the people come along with us, that's where the systems function the best. So putting up a system for us is relatively easy. So we can build 4 systems every day, for example. The scalability constraint is always people on the other side. So people that are maintaining the systems and making sure that they never break down, making sure that they continue to run, making sure that the community itself has bought into this thing. So scalability for me, I see it a lot in how do we scale the people that we bring along with? How do we scale the skills that we impart in the communities that we operate in? What can you use to ensure that these skills can be transferred as quickly as possible to the right people? Because we can build the systems. Building the systems is an easy part. The engineering is an easy part. The people on the other side, that's the tougher part. if you go into another country, let's say a country like DRC, right now we're working on a project in DRC. What are the right people that we're going to find to send the equipment to ensure that the equipment continues to run? That's the biggest scalability question that we've got, that one that we are answering intently at the moment.
Well, it sounds like you are also in a position to help educate more scientists, bring along
Yeah.
more scientists to
Yeah.
apply this. Murendeni Mafumo, Kusini Water, thank you so much for being part of Say Hi to the Future. And, as we do with all of our guests, we love to check in from time to time to see how it progresses.
Yeah.
So look forward to continuing our conversations together.
Thank you so much, Ken. Thank you very, very much for having me and to your team. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. And I've been listening to a lot of your podcasts. I was listening to a lot of your podcasts in the last 2 weeks. So thank you so much for all the work that you do.
Thank you.